Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installation of the Aurora Dialogue series, a gathering of minds and spirits around important humanitarian topics. I'm Armin Afayan. I'm the executive director of the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, which identifies, supports, and amplifies the work of grassroots humanitarian leaders around the world. In these turbulent times, the noise of conflict often drowns out the voices of the vulnerable. Today's conversation focuses on the plight of women and girls who are disproportionately affected by violence and oppression, specifically in the DRC. By delving deep into this topic, using a regional lens, today's discussion will shed light on an issue that reflects on humanity globally and therefore demands our collective attention and action. This topic is close to the hearts of us at Aurora for a few reasons. First, one of our key objectives is the empowerment of women and girls. Our commitment to this cause is unwavering, and we believe that everyone has the potential to be a humanitarian, whether by raising your voice, donating your funds or time, spreading awareness. Each one of us can contribute to making a significant change. Second, two of our Aurora laureates hail from the DRC, and they are doing incredible work there to strengthen their communities against immense odds. They are the 2021 laureate, Julien Lusenge, and our newest laureate, 2024's laureate, Dr. Denis Mukwege. I'll leave you with this. The women and girls of the DRC cannot afford to wait. They need our support, our voices, our action. We must rally together to bring hope and tangible change to their lives. It is our collective responsibility to stand in solidarity with them, to amplify their stories, and to ensure their suffering does not go unnoticed. These women often face circumstances that leave them practically voiceless, and we can help to ensure that the world is not deaf to their suffering. We can help them break the silence. Thank you all for your presence and for your unwavering support. Together, we know we can build a future where every woman and girl can live free from fear and violence. And I know that in today's turbulent world, that can feel trite or far off, but the folks that you're about to hear from are taking tangible steps to make that a reality. And so I hope you will join us in the conversation today and in future dialogues as well. We're actually going to hear from one of our 2021 laureates, Julien Lusenge. She's going to give us a brief recorded introduction to today's topic. We're also going to share a brief video about Dr. Denis Mukwege's work in the DRC. So I will hand it over to the rest of the conversation. Thank you again for being with us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing this conversation.
Je m'appelle Julien Lusenge, lauréate de l'Aurora Prize 2021. Je suis vraiment contente qu'on puisse organiser cette conférence pour briser le silence sur la crise humanitaire oubliée. La crise humanitaire grave oubliée en RDC. Les femmes, les enfants, les personnes de troisième âge. Toute une population déplacée. On atteint maintenant plus de 7,5 millions de Congolais qui sont chassés, forcés de quitter leur village, errés. Et même là où ils sont partis, ils sont tués par des bombes, par des machettes. Merci à Aurora et à Crisis Action pour avoir organisé cette rencontre, pour qu'on puisse parler. Et je vous supplie de porter la voix des femmes congolaises, de porter la voix des Congolais
Congolese women
au monde,
and
pour leur
Congolese
dire,
people
pour dire à tout
throughout
le
the world
ça suffit.
to share the message that enough is enough. We cannot continue to be killed because of our mineral resources, because it's due to these resources, due to our forests, that we are being killed. So please, and thank you very much for having organized this, and all of you who are participating today, I ask you to please spread all this information that you will receive to show that we cannot forget part of human beings on Earth who are killed as
Merci
innocents.
aussi à Aurora qui nous a
A
donné
huge thank you as well to Aurora,
le prix en
who
2021,
awarded
qui
us
nous a aidés
the
à
2021
assister toutes ces
prize
femmes.
and helped us
Merci encore
to
aussi parce
assist
que
all these women.
le docteur Mukwege, le prix
Thank
Nobel
you.
de la paix, a
Because
reçu
also
aussi ce
for
prix
Dr. Mukwege, who
cette
also
année.
received this
Et
award
nous en
this year.
sommes très, très reconnaissants.
We're very
Envers
thankful for
Aurora
this,
et envers tous
to
les
Aurora
donateurs d'Aurora.
and to all
Continuez
the
à soutenir
donors of Aurora.
continuez
Please
à nous
continue to
soutenir,
support Aurora,
parlez de notre
to support
souffrance
us.
et nous
Please
croisons
speak
pas les
of
bras.
our
Nous sommes
suffering.
aussi à l'œuvre, nous sommes
Let us
toujours
continue
debout
to
pour
fight
dire non à la guerre,
and
non
stand
à
up
la
to say
violence.
no to
Nous voulons
war,
vivre en
no
paix
to
dans la
violence.
région de
We
Grand
want to
Lac.
live
Merci.
in peace in our region. Thank you.
Nous vivons ces chaos depuis 1996. Ça nous donne cette impression que c'est une guerre éternelle. La population congolaise, la plupart aujourd'hui, sont nés dans la guerre. Ils ont grandi dans la violence et ils ne connaissent qu'une chose, la violence. Les rebelles prennent les enfants, les femmes comme des butins de guerre. En fait, je crois que ce qui se passe au Nord Kivu et en Ituri est d'abord insupportable. Nous pouvons constater que aujourd'hui, le nombre de victimes de violences sexuelles augmente.
Elle vient d'où? Chabunda.
Quand j'ai fait 10 ans au bloc opératoire, j'ai commencé à me rendre compte que mon travail au bloc n'était pas suffisant.
Seule la lutte contre l'impunité peut briser la spirale des violences. Il n'y aura pas de paix ni développement économique et social sans respect des droits de l'homme. Il n'y a pas de paix durable sans justice.
Qui permet la mise en œuvre de la justice? C'est l'État.
J'accepte donc d'être votre candidat à la présidence de la République démocratique du Congo.
Et donc je voulais absolument pouvoir faire tout ce que je pouvais faire. J'ai posé ma candidature.
Mutupatie tuongoze nchi, tumalize vita.
Je n'étais pas naïf. Je savais qu'il y aura la fraude. Mais pour moi, c'était important d'y aller malgré, pour tout simplement soutenir la population et responsabiliser aussi la population. Je trouve toujours l'inspiration dans les femmes que je soigne, que je respecte beaucoup pour toute l'inspiration qu'elles me donnent. Quand les femmes se battent, Elles ne se battent pas pour elles-mêmes. Elles se battent aussi pour le droit de leurs enfants, pour le droit de leurs maris, pour le droit de leur communauté. Et je pense que cet esprit qui domine les femmes, c'est ça l'esprit qui devrait dominer notre monde d'aujourd'hui. Nous devons continuer à nous battre pour tout simplement dire la guerre n'est pas une option.
So thank you to Julienne for her words. We will have a translation for those who weren't able to understand in real time posted with the recap of this event. And thank you to Dennis in the video for bringing us directly into the root of what we're discussing today. I think it's a great framing for the conversation. It's now my pleasure to introduce and hand over to today's moderator, the CEO of Conversation Strategist, Nozifo Chapalala. Thank you so much for being here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. What an absolute pleasure. So we have about 48 minutes together to have this moderated panel discussion. And so thank you very much for the opening voices that have really set the scene for us. One of the things that stands out for me is from Madame Lusenga, who says, the women and girls of the DRC cannot wait. And that is the same spirit of urgency that we bring into this conversation. Before I introduce my panelists, allow me to remind everybody who's following this conversation on different platforms, whether you're reaching us through our live stream on YouTube or Facebook, that we are also encouraging you to help us amplify the conversation. The hashtag that we're using is Eyes on DRC, hashtag Eyes on DRC. Let's bring the visibility of this conversation to the world as well. Now, I also want to quickly introduce my panelists. We are joined by 4 amazing panelists. I'm going to invite them to pop on their cameras so that I can also have a good line of sight of them. We're joined by Madame Sandrine Dusamba. She is the executive coordinator at the Female Solidarity for Integrated Peace and Development organization. And of course, she'll tell us a little bit about the work that they do and how it is contributing to really bringing about a different reality for women and girls on the ground. She's an activist, and she's also part of the movement of young women leaders in the DRC. And so from her, we'll get a lived on the ground experience. We're also joined by Pauline Kaubire. Pauline, welcome to you. I know Pauline is joining us from Accra today, but Pauline is a communications and advocacy coordinator at the Women's International Peace Center. And the work that she does looks at how to amplify the voices of girls and women, bringing visibility to some of their structural issues using storytelling. So a big welcome to you, Pauline, as well. Mr. Bruno Lamarquis, thank you, sir, for being here. I see you on my screen. Mr. Lamarquis is the acting head of MONUSCO, which of course is the mission in the DRC, the UN mission, the stabilization mission rather in the DRC. He's also a deputy special representative to the Secretary General of the United Nations, a resident coordinator as well as a humanitarian coordinator. Mr. Lamarquis, thank you very much, sir, for being here. And last but not least, we're joined by Nelson Castro. And Nelson is from Vital Voices. He's a director that looks after regional networks and global engagement, and also oversees the implementation of Voices Against Violence, which is an international initiative that looks at working against sexual and gender-based violence. So a big welcome to all of you. I think a good place to start is by understanding the current situation on the ground. And Mr. Lamarquis, I'd like to bring that question to you and to give you ample opportunity to share with us an overview of what is the current situation in the DRC when we talk about the reality that women and girls are facing. What does that look like exactly?
Thank you, Nazifo. Can you hear me well?
Very well, sir. Please continue.
Excellent. So thank you, dear participant. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to shed light on the Congolese crisis, which ranks among the world's most complex, protracted 30 years, and overlooked crisis, but I also call it one of the most tolerated crises on earth. In the DRC, humanitarian needs have significantly increased over the past year in the context of a steep resurgence of conflict, in unspeakable violations against women and girls and children, as well as epidemics and floods. So we have a combo. It's more urgent than ever that solution, firstly political, be sought to bring peace and stability to the country. We all welcome here the 2-week humanitarian truce that has been negotiated by the US in Eastern DRC, which began last week. I take this opportunity to encourage the parties to use this truce to inject fresh momentum into ongoing regional peace effort to save lives and eradicate violence. As you know, the country's security landscape is deteriorating amid heightened tension across the entire region and risk of a regional conflagration. This is essentially due to the M23 crisis in North Kivu. The M23 movement and its backers are rapidly expanding in North Kivu with a spillover effect in South Kivu. It is also due to the activism of a group called ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces. It's a group that has roots in Uganda and has pledged allegiance to ISIS. But there are also many other conflicts, including local conflict, especially in Ituri, with horrific attacks, for example, from 2 groups called Codeco and Zaire, as well as the emergence of other conflict, including right next door from Kinshasa. All this is happening at the time when MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping mission in the DRC, is gradually withdrawing so it's a gradual and organized process, and is doing so at the request of the DRC government after 25 years of presence. MONUSCO has just withdrawn from South Kivu, but the government has stated last week at the Security Council that conditions are not yet met to move to the next phase, and the next phase being the withdrawal from North Kivu and then the withdrawal from Ituri. So the focus right now is on the consolidation of the transition in South Kivu, where from now on, the Congolese security forces are responsible for security and protection of civilians. The situation on the ground is very, very complex. There are multiple forces at play. There are the Congolese security forces, Congolese armed group, foreign armed group, neighboring countries, invited or not invited, private security contractors, the SADC regional force, and MONUSCO. The widespread violence has both direct and indirect consequences, notably massive displacement of population, but the situation is also having broader consequences on the DRC development trajectory and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal. For example, in spite of its incredible potential, the DRC is home to the largest number of food insecure people in the world. 25 million people of Congolese are food insecure, 1 out of 4. There are also 7.3 million internally displaced people in the DRC. It's the second highest number in the world after Sudan. Mostly in the eastern provinces of Ituri, where 40% of the population is displaced. So put that in perspective, in your own countries, 40% of your own countries is displaced. 30% of the population is displaced in North Kivu and over 20% in South Kivu. So these are massive numbers and percentages. Since the beginning of the war, daily fighting in North Kivu, as well as inter-community conflicts and atrocities perpetrated by armed groups, has forced an additional 1 million people to flee their home. So a year ago, we were about 6 million, they were about 6 million, now we are 7.3. At the same time, compliance by armed actors with international humanitarian law and human rights law, including protection of civilians, it remains a major concern. The violation are plenty: attacks against civilians, attacks against humanitarian, attacks against civilian infrastructure, and the presence of armed men in arms in IDP sites. In this context, sexual gender-based violence has reached a dramatic level, with almost 123,000 GBV cases reported last year, mainly displaced women and young people. And the reality is certainly well beyond this alarming figure, as many cases remain underreported. Incidents of sexual violence against children has steeply increased this year, a 30% increase compared to last year. Based on current trends, we expect that 2024 will become another record year because of all the additional displacement of population. So the world cannot just keep watching this. It's under our eyes. Behind these figures lie the suffering of mostly women and girls, most of whom have taken refuge in IDP sites, and some of whom have adopted negative survival strategies. This serious protection crisis can only be tackled with by the full commitment of the national authorities. It's about the fight against impunity. It's about upholding justice, prosecute the aggressors, but also provide assistance to the victims with the support of the many partners, especially humanitarian partners, but also create condition for decent incomes to the displaced people. They have been deprived from their income. They are far away from their farm, from their villages, so they have no income. And often they have to turn to negative coping strategies. The health situation is also atrocious. There are always multiple epidemics at the same time in the DRC, but with the condition in the displaced site and all the displaced population, it's really a big worry. For example, last year, 52,000 cases of cholera, doubling the numbers of 2022. So protection challenges are among the most outstanding challenges we are facing. There are also issues of humanitarian space, which is important to understand as part of the context. It's becoming increasingly complex and dangerous to operate in Eastern DRC with all the fighting I've mentioned. During the first 5 months of 2024, there has been 165 attacks against aid workers, and that's a 15% increase compared to last year, including the most recent attack 2 weeks ago on a humanitarian NGO convoy, which resulted in the death of 2 humanitarian workers. So access conditions are difficult or very difficult, and the continuing escalation of conflict is forcing us to devote a lot of time to what we call deconfliction, access negotiation, and advocacy for the respect of international humanitarian law. Another challenge is the financial challenge. The needs are enormous. The financial needs for a solid humanitarian response this year amounts to $2.6 billion. And we are mid-year now, we are at the mid-year point, and we are 26% funded. We thank all our donors, all our partners. We talk about very large amounts, but 26% funded, that means we are not able to provide a decent response to all the people in need. So, dear participants, the Congolese humanitarian crisis is not unfolding in a vacuum, but in a complex political security landscape and tense regional dynamics in the Great Lake region, and that's a situation that has lasted since for 30 years, as Dr. Mukwege has reminded us. So a robust, very efficient and well-supported humanitarian response is absolutely key and indispensable. But as we know, a humanitarian response is not the solution to humanitarian problems. So the best response is to decrease humanitarian needs. And to decrease humanitarian needs, I think it's at 3 levels. First and foremost, it's the primacy of political solutions. So member states, regional, global, needs to invest towards peace in the DRC and in the region. The world needs a DRC in peace. And first and foremost, for the people of the DRC who are really tired, but also because the DRC is a unique country in the world, and it's a solution country to some of the world's global problems. Because of its forest, which is the #1 forest to sequestrate carbon, because of all its strategic minerals and other resources, the DRC is a solution country in the face of climate change and the energy transition challenges globally. So we need a DRC at peace. That's first. Second, it's imperative to do more at all levels, including internationally, to tackle the underlying drivers of conflict, which I call the Gordian knot, so the deep root causes of those crises, in particular land issue, because land issue is the main conflict driver for intercommunal conflict, but also, and mostly, the illicit exploitation of natural resources. So this is about blood minerals, conflict minerals, but not only, it's also many other types of natural resources. It's forest, it's agricultural product, it's coffee, it's cocoa, and so on. There is a lot of illicit exploitation of natural resources. And it's also the issue of illicit financial flows. Yeah? Follow the money. So, and this is to be done in a context also characterized by multiple governance deficit and weak state presence. So it's easier said than done because many of those root causes are going beyond the borders of the DRC. And finally, my final word, the third solution, the third avenue is to move at scale in operationalizing what we call the humanitarian development peace nexus and search for solution, durable solution for the displaced people whenever and wherever there are opportunities for people to go back home. They should be fully supported by all communities, peace, development, and humanitarian, so that this would lead to a decrease of humanitarian aid. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamarcri. I think that was a very comprehensive framing of the conversation, giving us the numbers and the facts of what's happening on the ground. 123,000 reported cases, which of course we know would be underreported because of the impact around some of the attitudes that we know probably exist around sexual gender-based violence, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. I'm keen to get into some of the challenges on the ground as experienced by those working on the ground and what makes it difficult to begin to address some of those issues. As I do that, let me remind you that you can actually send us questions and comments using our hashtag Eyes on the DRC. The team is on standby to let me know if you've sent them through. And of course, we'll integrate your voice into the conversation. But let me go to Pauline first. Pauline, you're with the Women's International Peace Center. Very briefly, in less than a minute, can you just tell us a little bit about what the International Women's Peace Center does, but more importantly, what is, in your view, the key challenges that make it so difficult to actually address the issues on the ground? I think for a moment that we just might have lost Pauline. I know that she's in Accra. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to transition to Sandrine instead. And Sandrine, I'm going to bring the exact same question to you. However, I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about your work as an executive coordinator, and in particular, as you talk about the work that you're doing at the Female Solidarity Center for Integrated Peace and Development. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do, but more importantly, what is the challenge about addressing the issues on the ground? Over to you, Sandrine.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la parole. Merci de m'avoir présenté. Je m'appelle Sandrine.
Thank you very much for introducing me and giving me the floor. My name is Sandrine Lusamba. I'm an international coordinator for Women's Solidarity for Peace and Development, an organization that is women-led, working in the DRC for more than 20 years now. And our work focuses on the protection and the rights of women, the promotion of and the involvement of women as actors in the peace process. So I thank Bruno for giving the context. And in this context that he described, I think you can really imagine this conflict that's been going on for more than 20 years with so many displacements. Today, we think it's more than 10 million internally displaced people in the country. And some people have moved for more than 20 times. Some people are staying in camps for more than 2 or even 3 years. And so all of this causes major protection issues. And organizations like ours works more to bring direct assistance to these people. Because you see, with all this displacement, women and children are facing many protection problems. Many women are victims of gender-based violence, and of course, the worst type of violence of this kind is sexual violence. And today, over 32,000 women since the beginning of the year have been helped with these issues. In that regard, we work with prevention actions in which we inform the population on what are gender-based violences and how we can call them out, what are the services that can help them with this, that are available for women and girls, and even for boys as well. So we give them direct help when it comes to food, clothing, access to water, access to sanitation. But all of that is very difficult, of course, and we're not doing enough. In these situations, we see several people, many people living in difficult situations in camps for displaced people. If you visited, you wouldn't even understand how people managed to survive there. Some people also received in host families, which are also vulnerable. For instance, if I have 5 children and I don't have enough resources, and then if there's more people from my village who I have to host, that makes my life even harder. So we want to also support those people. Just a few months ago, I was visiting with Mr. Bruno and other members of feminine women organizations. One woman told us, "Ma'am, we need humanitarian help. It is our right because we did not choose to be displaced." And this woman who was talking to me, she had to be displaced more than 5 times. And every time she had to move, she lost everything she had. And that's the situation of many women. They need access to sanitary products, water, food, access to education for their children. A whole generation of children aren't studying today, and it's hard to even count them today. So we wonder what will be the future of this generation. And you understand that gender-based violence impacts many different areas. When there's not enough support of women, it impacts children, as Mr. Bruno said. When there's not enough water in camps, then women have to walk for very long distances to fetch that water. Many camps don't have access to electricity. Children have to go and pick up wood to stay warm and for cooking. So we cannot wait to react, and we need to find lasting solutions today. I would like to call on the community. The Humanitarian Response Program at the beginning of the year mentioned over 25 million people who needed urgent help in DRC. But with the heightened conflict since March of this year, the rate of displaced people and people in dire need is even higher now. And as a national organization, we have limited funds, and even international funds working with us in the field have limited resources. And the whole humanitarian community really needs you. We need your voices for this problem. Please speak up to representatives and also to all the forces involved in the war, because it's women, girls, boys, and men who are suffering from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. I've seen that you're getting a round of applause because of how you've delivered that message to us. And of course, the call to action is very loud. I'm mindful of the fact that we're running short on time, but what I'd want to do, Sandrine, very quickly, is I'd love for you to address a question that we received during the registration process. And the question is, what are the prevailing attitudes about sexual and gender-based violence in the communities? And does that affect the amount of reporting that actually takes place? And if I can give you just less than a minute for that, please.
Oui, le violence sexuelle, comme toujours utilisé en RDC, c'est d'abord...
Yes, sexual violence, as always, are, of course, a weapon of war used to destroy social fabrics. And today, these violences have destroyed communities, and they all need a lot of psychological help because everyone knows someone who's been a victim of sexual violence, whether it be your child, your neighbor, your mother. And so this impacts the whole community. So we're trying to raise awareness to make sure that everyone can fight against this. But there's so many different actors in these conflicts who are committing these acts of violence to destroy and destabilize and weaken communities so that they can access the land more easily. Everything that's being done is to try to weaken community leaders and chase them off their land by using sexual violence as a weapon of destruction and weakening.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. And that's an important perspective that you bring in. And of course, it adds to the complexity that Mr. Lemarquis was outlining for us when we started. Let me make my way back to you. I'd love to give you just a minute for you to tell us a little bit about the work at the Women's International Peace Center, but more importantly, from your perspective, what informs the gap that makes it so difficult to address the issues on the ground? Over to you, please.
Thank you so much. Please confirm that you can hear me. My network is a bit unstable, so I hope I can make this question before it breaks off.
We can hear you, Pauline. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. So I work with Women's International Peace Center, which works with partners in conflict-affected settings and with regional institutions to make sure that women are at the peace table. So even for DRC, with the ongoing Nairobi and Luanda processes, to make sure that women are supported to build alliances, but also transform these peace-building spaces to be more gender inclusive and gender responsive. So with that background, for me, the first problem or the first challenge with the initiatives to resolve the crisis in DRC is that women are not on the peace table. And this means that the crisis in DRC demands our attention, like colleagues have alluded, but also the need for groundbreaking and feminist approaches to resolve this conflict. We've seen that the ongoing processes are influenced or informed by traditional models of conflict resolution and peace building, which have previously excluded women. And you cannot exclude half of the country's population and expect the peace process to be successful. But also discussing the role of the international community and what regional leaders can do in making sure that the conflict is resolved is that in a way they have facilitated the silence on the conflict. We know there are conflicts going on in Gaza, in Sudan, in Ukraine, but the conflict in DRC is forgotten, if we are being honest. If you watch the news tonight, it's hardly, you'll find hardly a story on DRC. So it's the role of regional leaders to make sure that DRC is on the agenda at all levels, from the local level, at regional levels on the continent, right now as we are meeting in Accra for the media summit of the heads of state to review the African Union theme of the year. It's the role of regional leaders to make sure that DRC is on the agenda of this meeting, as the high-level political forum is going on in New York right now. DRC needs to be on the agenda. And this brings me to the issue of utilizing the combined influence of the UN and the African Union to stop the conflict in the DRC, but also more importantly, to avoid it spilling over into the Great Lakes region. Colleagues have alluded to the regional dimensions of the conflict, the involvement of both local and foreign armed groups that are making the situation worse, particularly for women and children. A group that's mostly forgotten even in these discussions are women cross-border traders and how the conflict has affected them. For example, the border between DRC and Rwanda is usually closed, and what that means for their trade, but also coming to Uganda, where women and children make up about 80% of the refugees from DRC. And as we are talking about issues of sexual violence, that as they are in the camps, some of them are raped and also face issues of domestic violence. We know that yesterday the African Union Peace and Security Council discussed the situation in DRC, especially on the issues of mediation and reconciliation in trying to resolve the conflict with reference to the Nairobi and Luanda processes and consolidating that. And even when the Peace and Security Council last met or to reflect on the situation on DRC, they called for diplomatic efforts. And yet what we are seeing in the region is the extensive militarization. Yes, as MONUSCO is withdrawing, we saw that they've now deployed the SADC forces, and even before that, the East African Standby Force was there. But what happens is these are predominantly led by men, and coming back to the issue of sexual violence, that it only means that sexual violence is still going to increase. So for us, we reject a militarized response to the conflict because it leads to more suffering, especially for women and girls. And especially that as the African Union has an agenda on silencing the guns. So what does this mean if the response to a conflict is to deploy more forces? And even looking at the root causes of these conflicts that we see, usually it's issues of funding, for example, the humanitarian response that we are talking about, or even social services. And yet a militarized response means that there's more funding or more money allocated to it's not to amplify the tensions between the two countries, DRC and Rwanda, and how these are also making the situation worse, but in support of a women-led peace process that if anyone considered that or considered supporting tensions together. We've seen women in DRC engage rebel groups successfully before. So could a women-led peace process be supported? And even speaking on the involvement of women in the Nairobi and Luanda processes, we know that President Uhuru engaged women, but this engagement was as victims of gender-based violence. What we want is for women to actually be on the peace table itself beyond consultation, to refer to them as peace builders and also people who can bring valuable contributions in the process. So because I see that we are running out of time, I'll just quickly run to the recommendation that the AU, the regional economic communities and regional mechanisms, ICGLR, SADC, East African Community, together with the UN need to strengthen cooperation to resolve the crisis in DRC. And this means for them to work together but also consolidating these efforts. Also, in terms of MONUSCO's engagement, the fact that colleagues earlier alluded that MONUSCO is exiting, but what's the exit strategy? We saw the role of MONUSCO in reducing sexual violence in the region, much as some of the MONUSCO soldiers were also accused of sexual violence, but they did some work in capacity building and monitoring and also providing assistance to protect women and prevent sexual violence. So what's the exit strategy if MONUSCO leaves? These are all issues that need to be addressed, especially by the ICGR, by Rex. Sorry, hello.
Yes, thank you so much, Pauline. I was just interjecting. I'm mindful of the fact that we haven't heard all of the speakers, but thank you very much for putting some very strong calls to action on the table. Not only are you challenging us to think about women beyond just being victims of sexual and gender-based violence, but to have a rightful place at the peace negotiation and peace building table. You are asking us to be conscious about the impact of a militarized response, and of course challenging the African Union, especially at the cusp of the AU summit, to say, where is this conversation on the agenda? And I think you've done an excellent job of really bringing to the surface the key issues that need a lot more visibility. I want to make my way over to Nelson, because Nelson, I think we've heard both Sandrine and Pauline, as well as Bruno, talking to the need for different stakeholders to come together and to cooperate more effectively. In your view, what is it that the international community should be doing? And I'm specifically interested in hearing about the regional players and what they should be doing at this moment if we are going to bring about peace negotiations and change the reality for so many women and girls in the DRC.
Yes, thank you very much, Nasifa, for that question. And I will say it's important to start with raising awareness, right? There are so many terrible things going on in the world, like Pauline was alluding to, that the DRC is not getting enough media coverage. And if the world doesn't know what's going on, how can there be accountability and how can we start paying attention to this? So first and foremost, the world needs to see what's happening in the DRC. And we need to put pressure on those international organizations, on those regional actors to start thinking about that peace process. But I want to also center the survivor experience here, because as we've heard, women and girls are especially vulnerable to SGBV during conflict. And generally in the aftermath of violence, survivors have needs for medical treatments. They need to take care of their injuries and all of those resulting consequences of the violence. They need to have safe spaces and shelters available. So first we need to talk about those immediate and urgent needs. I know there's an entire peace process that is occurring, and women should be at the table, as Pauline was saying. But I want to also talk about the long-term impacts and the needs that survivors have. So we cannot forget about the psychosocial support, the legal needs and economic support that survivors will need after this. The meeting these needs is challenging in any society, and it becomes even more challenging in times of conflict. I think it is more even important then that we ensure that we are putting pressure on regional leaders to think about survivors. During a conflict, the climate of lawlessness tends to take hold, and this is taken advantage of by perpetrators. So I want to also talk about justice. I think obtaining justice can be a challenge for survivors. Perpetrators know this. In a crisis setting, they commit these crimes strategically, believing that they can act with impunity, that they will not be held accountable. So we have to also make sure that this is part of the conversation. They count on survivors not reporting, and reporting is difficult. And as you mentioned earlier, most of those stats are probably underreported because of how difficult it is to report. And so we have to ensure that we are talking about the stigmas, that we're breaking down those stigmas, and that we can encourage survivors to report, that we are training, whether it's police officers, humanitarian workers, health workers, to be able to take in those reports without re-victimizing survivors. And then we also have to talk about the process, what it looks like long-term. If we look at justice system, in normal non-conflict settings, there are still barriers to justice that survivors face. And I think when we talk about it in this case, we cannot forget that it's very important to document and bring these cases up still so that survivors can obtain justice. And we have to talk about what laws are going to be available to them, what that process will look like, and will it be survivor-centered? So these are the conversations we need to start having at this international level and pressure those regional actors to actually think about this and center the survivor experience in this peace process as well.
And Nelson, I want to stay with you a little bit because I think you've really given us a lot to think about in terms of what is support and what would be an adequate response, what would make it effective. One of the questions that's come through, and I just want to bring this to you, and it's come through from our live audience, and says, given the recent fighting, despite the US brokered truce that Mr. Namakri spoke about, why is there so much reluctance by the international community to sanction Rwanda, is the question. And in your view, Nelson, what steps do you think the international community needs to be taking to support Rwanda and the DRC in engaging through the Luanda process to find a mutually agreeable pathway towards de-escalation? And I know I'm putting the spotlight on, on the issues that many would prefer not to speak about, and I'm putting you on the spot, but what are some of your thoughts about that reluctance and what informs it, and how do we overcome that reluctance?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think there is, I can't speak on behalf of the US, but I think there isn't enough pressure because there isn't enough coverage. Like, we need more information. The media needs to cover this a lot more so that we can band together as an international community and start discussing this. I think it's a very complex situation, like as Bruno was mentioning, and I think what we can do as the international community is start raising awareness and start speaking to this. I'm sure Sandrine, Pauline, and Bruno can also speak about that need and that reluctance from all players to actually address this.
And I'm looking at my screen to see if any one of them wants to jump in on this and give additional comments. But I do have another question that's lined up, and the question comes from Nicole Musimbi, and Nicole says, I am a partnership coordinator at the Nobel Women's Initiative from Goma in the DRC. And maybe let me bring this question to you, Sandrine, please. Nicole is saying, given the rise of ongoing conflict, it's very sad to know that we have outdated data. For example, we do not seem to know the exact number of deaths when we look at the statistics. The question is, what do we need to do to collect updated data that is gender sensitive? And I think it's a brilliant question because, as Nelson says, that we need to make the narrative and the story and give it more coverage in the media. That story has to be factual, and that story needs to be up to date. So we need to have the numbers at our fingertips. What are some of your thoughts on how do we do a better job of getting the correct data of what's actually happening on the ground?
Alors, je pense que la question m'a été posée. Alors, le données des organisations comme Sofepa dit, nous avons de données.
So to answer the question, as it was said, we have some data from women that we help, but also from all the actors who are taking action in the region, for instance, the different clusters who are under the leadership of certain agencies, and then we can get some data from that. But as you know, we're working in a very broad context with a lot of access issues. That means that compiling this data takes some time, for sure. But we do have some data that's available. if you're close to Sophie, for instance, a certain cluster, you can access some data there that is current.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. And I think the question is quite good, because it says to us, yes, we have data, but is it always the most updated data? Can it build the story that brings the visibility? And so, Sandrine, thank you for pointing us to a starting point of where the data might lie. Pauline, let me bring your voice in one final time. I want to maybe raise the question that came through part of our registration process, and I want to see if I still have Pauline with us. Yes, she's still with us, and if I can encourage you, Pauline, to maybe pop your camera on if you still can. The question that's come, one of the questions that's come through our registration process is around the 3 E's: education, economic opportunity, and employment, right? And the question was asking to say, to what extent do women and girls have access to education, to economic opportunity, to employment, especially as we're thinking about some of the drivers that we are seeing of how women are surviving and girls are surviving their internal displacement. Could we do a better job in these areas, and what impact would that have if we got that right?
So it's good that this question is coming in at this time, because as I mentioned, I'm at the Media Summit, and it's reflecting on the AU theme of the year, which is education, educating an African fit for the 21st century. So we've also had the conversations here on education in situations of conflict. And for DRC, it's a complicated situation, because one, the moment the guns start blazing is that schools are going to close. We've had people sharing experiences that when these schools close, they are now used as storage facilities for weapons and arms. So in such situations, there is no way for school-going children to continue going to school. And as they stay home, as they are forced to interact with rebels or military personnel, that they are still at a risk of rape. The similar issues apply to issues of employment and also the economic justice. But this is where the role of the regional economic communities comes in. DRC belongs to SADC, East African Community, ICGLR, and it's their role to respond to these issues. For example, still looking again at the issue of women cross-border traders and the violence they face at border posts. Some are forced to pay money, some also experience sexual violence, as they've reported. So it's the role of the regional economic communities to come and try and resolve these issues, working with both countries, especially at the border posts, but also supporting the DRC government, because it has a national action plan on women, peace, and security in place. And this national action plan has commitments for education, for economic justice, women's participation that we are talking about. And if the government is supported to implement these resolutions, then we could make some headway. Yeah.
Yeah, Pauline, thank you very much for that, because again, you bring another very vivid image to our minds, and what actually happens at the height of conflict, and how schools become or stop being places of learning and teaching and learning, but rather places of storing weapons and other means. So thank you for that, and for bringing that image close to us. So one of the things that I love when I moderate is when I'm watching one of my panelists taking notes. That always means that they have a lot to reflect about. So Mr. Lemarquis, as we close, I want to give you the final word. As you've listened to the colleagues on the call, just sharing some of their opinions and taking notes as I've been watching you do, what is maybe your one message that you'd like to share with us, a key reflection that you're walking away with on the back of this conversation?
I would say to all the listeners, do everything you can to give greater visibility to this crisis in the Great Lake and to the suffering of people in the DRC. This has been going on for 30 years. And please, if some of you have influence over, I think what needs to be given much more visibility is the root causes of this crisis, mostly this issue of the economics of the conflict. So it's the illicit exploitation of natural resources. There is too much silence internationally on this scandal of illicit exploitation of natural resources that is really driving this conflict. As Julien had said at the very beginning, this is mostly about that. In every single iPhone, there is a little bit of DRC, and in a lot of electronics, there is a little bit of DRC. In some of the fair trade coffee or fair trade cocoa, there is a little bit of DRC. Illicit, illegal, spilling blood. So it's very important for all of us, including the international advocacy group, civil society group, and so on, to make much more noise about the root causes of the conflict in the DRC. We talk too much about the symptoms and not enough about the root causes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamaki. In the hour that we had, I think it is a baseline from which we continue to build. We've come to the end of our time together, but allow me just to remind you, it is hashtag Eyes on DRC. This is how we amplify the conversation. This is how we lift some of the insights and some of the sound bites that have come out of this conversation, and we share them on the world. And this is how we play our part in breaking the silence, in bringing visibility, and in acknowledging the fact that the women and the girls of DRC just cannot wait. My name is Nozipho Shabalala. It's been an absolute pleasure. A big thank you to Bruno Lemaki, Sandrine Lusamba, Nelson Castro, and Pauline Kaubire for joining the panel discussion. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you might have joined us from in the world. Goodbye.